Hello everybody and welcome to this Vancouver Island University World VIUPoints webinar. The topic for today is sustainable mountain tourism, and the reason for today's session is to coincide with the International Mountain Day, the United Nations International Mountain Day, which is December 11th, 2021, and the theme of which is sustainable mountain tourism. And I suppose it couldn't come at a better time to have tourism and sustainable mountain tourism as a theme, whether we look at the effects on mountain areas as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, or whether we look at the ongoing and pressing climate emergency. There's enough reasons for us to focus on the international mountains and how the tourists and host communities are dealing with some of these pressing issues. My name is Patrick Bruder. I'm the British Columbia Regional Innovation Chair for Tourism and Sustainable Rural Development at Vancouver Island University on Coast Salish territory in the west coast of Canada. And my university, Vancouver Island University, acknowledges and thanks the Snuneymuxw, Coatzin, Cla'amin, Snonoas, and Qualicum First Nations on whose lands our university teaches and is based. We're joined today by a few presenters and a few live audience members, and hoping to hear and interact with all of you as we move through the session today. But we'll begin with the presentations, and we have 4 presenters, a couple from North America and a couple from Europe, and they're going to cover a much broader geography than just their home destinations. We're going to run the presentations in the following order. We're going to go from Marius Mayer to Cenk Demirolu, and then we're going to go to Sanjay Nepal, and then Natalie Ooi. And the reason for doing it in this order, we feel, is going to give us a good balance between taking us from some of the very, very broad issues, as well as some local perspectives from Marius, through to some of the climate change challenges and other challenges will be presented by Cenk. Sanjay is going to give us some community perspectives from, again, his unique perspective. And then we'll finish with Natalie, who's going to look at some of the more local industry pressing issues, such as labor. Does that sound right for the presenters? Are you nodding your heads? It's roughly what we're going to cover. Okay, so with that said, thank you all for joining us live. And we'll begin with Marius Mayer, and I will let you introduce yourself, Marius.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning on the West Coast, and good afternoon or good evening in Europe. My name is Marius Mayer from Innsbruck University in Austria, where I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher. And I shared my screen. You should hopefully all see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I will start with my presentation. So yeah, dear Patrick, thank you very much again for organizing this webinar and for your kind introduction. I'd like to quickly present an uncomprehensive overview about sustainability issues in mountain tourism from a European perspective. And the first challenge, as you might have seen already, is climate change. And I will only shortly address some of its negative effects on mountain tourism, but also mention some maybe unexpected potential positive consequences. Our dear colleague Cenk Demirolu will address climate change in much more depth and in detail in his input. So as this news report from the end of October shows from Austria, that this small-scale, low-altitude ski area in Austria will end its operation after 70 years due to a lack of snow and too high losses. And this points to the problems many alpine ski areas are already facing, but definitely will face in the upcoming decades with further increased warming, higher operating costs due to higher needs for man-made snow and declining demand. However, climate change can also be seen as a certain chance for alpine tourism, as the summer season might be further revitalized as a kind of Sommerfrische, as we say in German. That means nowadays people from the increasingly hot lowlands might spend their summer vacation in the cooler mountains with remote work, allowing them to pursue a kind of staycation. In addition, the Alps have the advantage of good accessibility of most important source markets without the necessity to fly. So people can drive there with electric cars or by train, which provide relatively short distance access, which might turn out to be beneficial when carbon pricing might really kick in some years, hopefully. So the second issue is, of course, the COVID-19 crisis, which has currently enormous impacts on alpine tourism. And due to the seasonality of the virus waves, it hit winter tourism far harder than summer tourism so far. It also triggers sustainability debates, as tourism critics see the current mass tourism model as one of the reasons for the fast virus spread in the first phase of the crisis in March-April 2020. This notion was mostly backed up by super spreader destinations like the Tyrolean Ischgl in March 2020, which also received some academic coverage, as you can see in these examples here. I will share the link to our own publication later on. So this timeline here from Tyrol, Austria, shows you the unique effect of COVID-19 on alpine tourism with the unprecedented declines, especially in the winter season of -17 and then -97%. Because last winter season was completely cancelled due to the lockdown in Austria and the main source markets. The summer season, as you can see here, had also a drop of 30%, but this summer season of 21 was much better and all again reached the level of 2015. The COVID-19 situation also influenced the third issue, the not always positive attitudes of the local population towards alpine tourism and the often negative public image of alpine tourism. However, the crisis did not generate these feelings, but fostered these already existing ones. So the presented events in Ischgl and other super spreader destinations, they increased the negative image of ski tourism as being detrimental to the environment, as being not sustainable and having no future anyway. And similarly, the increased visitor flows, especially near agglomeration areas in the summer season, reinforced the notion of over-tourism, which had been debated already before the pandemic. The strong demand for safe, short-distance and outdoor-oriented destinations in the summer seasons of the pandemic also might kind of foreshadow the potential demand shifts influenced by climate change adaptation in later decades. So to underline this quickly, this comment in the German weekly newspaper Die Zeit, The Times, from November 2020 underlines this negative perception of ski tourism. It says, literally, leave the skis. Ski tourism has no future and Corona is the chance for change. These two papers here show that already before the COVID-19 crisis, the public resistance against mega events like the Olympics, but also for large-scale tourism projects like the connection of two ski areas, was already present among the local population in Tyrol. So this is not a new development, but it has been enforced by COVID-19. And COVID-19 is also linked to the fourth challenge for sustainable mountain tourism in the Alps, the considerable labor shortage. And the colleagues in our webinar will stress that even more in their talks. And it's related to staff moving out of tourism. And in the European Alps, we have a lot of migrant workers from Eastern Europe. They went home to their home countries in the crisis and never came back so far. But also labor shortage is related to much more long-term demographic change in Central Europe, with every new generation being smaller as the precedent. And this also influenced demand trends with declining number of skiers when baby boomers are retiring. And furthermore, in the most important source markets, the share among the younger generation of migrants is getting higher and higher. And so far, it's not clear how high their affinity for mountain tourism will be or will develop. However, at the moment, that's not a demand problem. The demand for outdoor recreation in the Alps is really high, again, independent of the COVID-19 pandemic, but nevertheless further increased due to missing alternatives. So to sum up, there is a complex nexus of issues influencing the sustainable future of mountain tourism in the Alps, some hampering the path towards more sustainability, some enforcing it. We also have to consider the situation in Europe with 8 different national states, especially the different situations between the smaller alpine-bound states like Switzerland, Austria, and Slovenia, compared to the much bigger states like France, Italy, and Germany, where the Alps only play relatively marginal roles. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the rest of our webinar.
Thank you, Marius. That was a great start. Nice overview, and you also touched on some specific issues. I was very interested in the beginning, and hopefully we can come back in the discussion when you mentioned a little bit on the topic of sustainable transportation to mountain destinations, which is something that I'm particularly interested in, but I think we'll come back to that in the discussion. I've made a note of that. And so we will move on quickly to Cenk. Cenk.
Thank you,
And
Patrick.
feel free to, yeah, thanks.
You have the screen, right? My presentation?
Yes.
Very good. So thank you very much, and hello everyone. And thanks again for joining us today. I will try to approach the sustainability issues in mountain tourism from a climate change perspective, as Marius mentioned. Of course, such an approach will need to consider that both the climate and the tourism systems are affecting each other in a mutual, they have a mutual interaction. And normally when we think of climate change and mountain tourism, we would immediately think about climate change impacts on the mountains. But of course, we know that the tourism system, through its destinations, origins, transit spaces, is actually emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And if you take the example of winter tourism or ski tourism in particular, you can imagine how big the most often negative impacts of higher temperatures, lack of snow, weather extremes are on the businesses and the wider economies. And even the culture of skiing itself. So it's not only about the money, but it's also about our lifestyles. Here, for instance, I wanted to highlight this book about the ski bumps, people who live for the love of skiing. And of course, there are many other aspects, such as resortification and corporatization of the mountain landscapes that might narrow down the living spaces of such subcultures, such as the ski bumps. But climate change is, of course, even worse than those factors, because without snow, we will have no ski resorts, no ski corporations, no ski bumps, nothing. So it is actually to the benefit of the ski industry or the wider ski community to be not only climate adaptive, but beyond that, climate friendly, as in these recent examples of the low carbon technologies. This first solar powered ski lift from Switzerland. This is all the way from a decade ago, and the very recent introduction of the first electrically driven snow groomer from Italy. But even beyond that, beyond the climate friendliness, the ski community needs to be a climate activist, a climate lobbyist, because you all very well know that the climate crisis cannot be fought individually. It's never enough just by decarbonizing your own backyard. Just got a message. Okay. And that being said, despite these innovations, these technological innovations and movements, I think we are still pretty much locked into the business as usual. For instance, we are soon to watch the Winter Olympics, and it is coming along with many environmental questions. Of course, it's not easy to decarbonize mountain tourism and make it ultimately sustainable. After all, mountains are often in remote locations. They require long-haul travel, and ski business, being in the cold environments, is a very, very high energy intensive sector. But we anyway need to solve these issues, because if we don't, here is, for instance, is an example of what's going to happen in Sweden throughout the century, with the snow reliable areas shrinking, these lighter gray areas and the white areas narrowing down in the far future in the century. And they will actually eventually put pressure on on areas of nature protection or even the reindeer grazing pastures of the indigenous Sami people. And it will, maybe these areas will be competing for ski destination development in the far future of the 21st century. Here is another geography, my home country, Turkey. And again, here you can see that the dark blue areas, I will just go back and forth. You can see how the dark blue areas are narrowing down. So these darker blue areas, which are the most climatically suitable areas for skiing, they are already shrinking in the near future within the next 3 decades from this year onwards in the next 30 years. Of course, there will be some ski resorts, some ski destinations that will look forward to climate change, simply because in the future they remain in the blue zones in the case of Turkey or the white zones in the case of Sweden. So with their relatively better snow reliability, they become the so-called winners of climate change in a way. And of course, this could be the case. I could agree with some of them, but most often these destinations happen to be at the most remote locations requiring air travel. And hopefully due to stronger mitigation measures to cut down aviation emissions, or even with norms, behavioral changes such as the flight shame culture that is emerging here in Sweden, even these so-called winners could be facing the challenges of the climate crisis. I'm gonna finish here with some more perspectives from a non-ski example regarding the mountains. I will refer a little bit back to what Marius was talking about regarding summer tourism in the mountains. Again, the case area is Turkey. This time I'm zooming into Antalya here with this recent study. And Antalya is a destination well known for beach tourism. And in this recent study, we were looking into how Antalya could perform from a touristic climate comfort perspective. And we could easily see that the green areas, the ideal conditions of the summer season that you could see here in the past during the 1971 to 2000 years, these areas are actually getting worse in the future. They're narrowing down, they're changing color to marginal conditions. And they are actually worsening to such a point by the end of the century that we will not be talking about touristic comforts, but we will talk about severe health issues. As you can see, this humidity index here, the one with the red lines, the humidity index will hit the dangerous category. And that means we will have high probability of heat strokes in these areas, except on the mountains. These mountains in Antalya, they today serve as a ski resort, but maybe in the future, they will become places for people to survive. So it will be an interesting feature, that's for sure. And yeah, we'll see about that. And here's a short announcement before I finish. In March, we are having a virtual conference on climate, tourism, and recreation. It will be a free event, no cost, and you're welcome to present or just join the audience. You can follow our Twitter account for updates on that, and I will copy the Twitter link to chat box now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cenk. Yeah, for those who are not familiar with the CCTR, it's a very, very good, very high level organization that really covers the balance between academic research and some of the more industry focused research. Yes, you can. Okay, thanks very much, Cenk. I did have to ask you, because I'm based in, very close to Vancouver in British Columbia, and do have to ask you about the Olympics. There's going to be a press conference today where Vancouver are apparently making a move for the 2030 Olympic Games. So any thoughts on that? What will our snow position be like at that stage? Yeah, you can. Yeah. What are our hopes for successfully doing that on the West Coast?
I think there is a couple of good studies from Dan Scott, Robert Steiger, somewhat analysis about former Olympic venues, how would their snow reliability be in the future. And you could really see the results on that. But of course, Olympics is beyond the climate issues. It's also a financial burden. So, I mean, if you want to get the Olympics, you probably get it because nobody wants it anyway. So that's another thing. So good luck on that. We'll see.
And just building on that point, Marius had previously shared this article that I just drop into the chat now, which was on a general sustainability of Olympic Games in the a general study on the sustainability of Olympic Games. So
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So you guys can see my screen, I suppose. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Patrick, for this invitation, and it's great to be here and talking about mountains. As well, some of you know that I've been working in Everest region for about 20 plus years, beginning with my PhD fieldwork on environmental issues in mountain trekking tourism in 1995. So it's been a long time. And I've been going to this place for quite some time, most recently in 2018. So I've kind of shifted from the environmental issues more on to the social issues, because when you talk about sustainability issues, you have to link these two things together. So this is the topic. So I'll be talking about highland portals in Mount Everest trekking and mountaineering tourism, and looking at this issue from the perspective of moral geography. Okay, so when you apply moral geography lens to Himalayan tourism, it's basically we are talking about the power to prescribe who may do what, where, and with whom. So it's moral geographies operate not only through a dominative power of control and exclusion, but also through performative powers of a special practice. And you see this play out very well in the Everest region. So this is again, the talk today is just as a small snapshot of what I've done in the last couple of years. So this beginning with these 3 primary research questions that I've asked in this small project. What I wanted to do today, though, is talk a little bit about the highland porters who are non-Sherpas, and but you have to contextualize this how these portals are functioning, or how portals are functioning in this area. Some contextual information. Immediately around the Everest region, Everest is actually quite rich. It's a very rich, affluent area, but immediately surrounding the Everest region, you have vast rural areas with, incidents of high poverty rates, very low levels of human development, lack of social services and economic opportunities, and there's a lot of social and economic marginalization, particularly among the non-Sherpas. So when I say Sherpas, I'm talking about the ethnic group and not necessarily the mountaineering term, where Sherpas are almost treated as equivalent to porters or helping hand, right? So I want to talk about a little bit of exploitation and discrimination, and how these porters, highland porters, are seen as outcasts within the tourism sphere, right? Because of a variety of issues, including the issues of indifference, apathy, and social exclusion. And these issues are not common to Himalayan porters. They have been, you can find literature relevant to this in other types of situations wherever tourism, or at least international tourism, is present. This paper that I worked on actually talks beyond Nepal, beyond Everest, and includes Pakistan and so on. So the next few slides are basically just a few shots that I took in 2018. On the left-hand side, you have Mount Pumori, which is right across Mount Everest. On the western side, there's a black peak that's very popular is around 5,500 meters, Kalapatar. That's a very popular trekking tourism destination. And Everest Base Camp is just below that. And some portraits of the porters. These are people, these are highland porters. These are they help in these mountaineering expeditions, not trekking tourism. As you can tell from the kind of gears that these yaks are packing. So that's so as you can tell, this is a very harsh terrain, very difficult life. You know, living here is quite harsh if not for tourism. So tourism makes it livable, not only for the Sherpas who have become tremendously rich, but also for these young Rai porters. So here's one example here how these porters occupy the lowest position in the trekking tourism industry, where they are being manipulated. I would say manipulated partly because they are not treated well by the city-based tour trekking operators. You have the Sherpa ethnicity, the Sherpa-owned lodge owners and operators. You have Khumbu, meaning the Everest region-based high-altitude guides and porters, city-based trekking guides, and then the non-Sherpa. So these are the non-Sherpa, mostly coming from the ethnic group of Rai, and they are in the neighboring districts. Interesting comparison here. Rais, they used to be relatively much more affluent than the Sherpas, but the tourism has completely changed the dynamics, partly because Sherpas occupy the tourism niche, right? So they are the primary inhabitants in the Everest region. Let's look at this. So in this paper, I talk about this exclusion and seclusion, that the tourism industry has forced upon these non-Sherpa or the Rai ethnic groups, right? There's a sharp distinction and separation between tourists and domestic visitors. There's all kinds of rules and codes of conduct forced on porters. There's restricted access to lodge premises and facilities, including this photo here that says, if you are a non-Sherpa or you are a porter, you're basically not allowed to use these toilets. That's primarily for foreign tourists, right? So that's just one small example. There's oftentimes denial of services, food and hospitality. Food here is quite expensive. There's all kinds of social discrimination, and physically they are separate. They are kept separate from the tourists, from the trekkers and mountaineers, right? So they are not allowed to interact. Most of them, the vast majority of them, do not interact with the porters, right? And there's obviously, not only from the government side, but also from the private industry side, there's very little porter welfare programs. Okay, so what I'm suggesting here is a little bit of engaging and disengaging practices within mountain tourism. One is beginning with the research questions, and one of the reasons why I was driven to this research is this, we talk about ethical tourism, sustainability, and we've been harping about this for 2.5 decades, but this front has not really moved forward. Right, especially, right now it seems that the environmental issues of tourism has taken over some of the social issues, including issues like this. So we need to expand research on moral tourism geographies. We also need to, acknowledge that tourism practices actually accentuate class and race divisions between stakeholders. That is clearly the case in Everest. There's a need for increased awareness of social justice issues among policy and decision makers, both at the government level, but also at the industry level, including some awareness on the part of those who are in positions of power, even in the local tourism industry, right? And then there needs to be some engagement in provision of appropriate welfare services, rights-based approach to service provisions for porters. That's been going on for some time, but it's not really been very effective. And I think tourism scholars as such, like myself and ourselves, including the group here, I think it's we need to we need to advocate for some of these, people in the bottom rungs of the, social, economic, and political ladder, right? So we need to perhaps consider our role as advocates or scholars with a social agenda. So that's what I call engagement. So with that, I think there's a lot of issues that we can talk about, but some of these things have been well articulated, much more than what I've just been able to say in this couple more minutes. This book that is coming out, edited by Nyopane and Timothy, it was supposed to be in print at the end of this year, but I think this Routledge has some backlog, so it's coming out hopefully early next year, and that is this paper is actually the basis of this presentation that I've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay, and a very interesting and a unique perspective from your own research in the field. Maybe one very quick question. From your time in the field, when you come across the tourists, and we're talking about sustainable mountain tourism, do the international tourists see themselves that they're on a sustainable tourism activity, or are they very much aware of these issues that are happening in front of them?
No, what I would say is when you go for trekking in the Everest region, you are confronted with fairly large number of international tourists who have come from quite a distance away, so they know the reality, right? But the fact is, everybody wants to go to Everest Base Camp. In fact, I'm thinking of a family trip in 2024 with my 2 kids and my wife. We're attracted to this region. So the region holds immense attractability, and sometimes it's really hard to escape from that reality, right? On one hand, we talk about sustainability. On the other hand, that's the reality. We all like to travel and travel to remote places.
Yeah. Thank you, and thanks for highlighting some of the social justice and worker issues, which ties in nicely to our next and final presenter, Natalie Ooi.
Thanks, Patrick, and I'm going to get this up. Perfect. So thank you all for having me. And as Patrick mentioned, my focus was going to originally look at both labor issues and affordable housing, but in the interest of time, I thought I'd concentrate on affordable housing in knowledge that Sanjay was going to be touching a little bit more on labor. But, when we get to the questions and discussions, I'm happy to talk about some of the labor issues that we're seeing within North America as well, because they really do go hand in hand with a lot of the issues I'm going to talk about as it relates to affordable housing. And so my presentation today is really going to shine this spotlight on North America and look at this key sustainability challenge, which is simply this lack of affordable housing in many mountain resort destinations. And so the issue, what is it? And so simply put, the cost of housing in many of these mountain resort communities is just well beyond what many people who permanently reside there or would like to reside there can afford. And so affordable housing has been around for a long time as an issue. It's not one that's new, and it's not one that's confined to mountain resort destinations. But historically, within these mountain resort communities, when we talked about affordable housing as an issue, it was often centered around these lower income wage earners, many of whom are seasonal tourism employees. But over time, as housing prices have drastically increased, we're seeing this conversation extend out to middle income employees and even middle to upper income households, such as, teachers and firefighters and first responders, local government employees, and even business owners who are also struggling to afford to live within the communities in which they work. Now, as mentioned, affordable housing has been an issue that's long been around, but it's one that's undoubtedly been exacerbated by the various factors I have up on screen here. And they've really coalesced together over the years to create what, some would argue is the perfect storm. And how it's done this is that we've seen these factors collectively distort this supply-demand equation. And it's what's helped to result in rapid increases in real estate values. And then COVID-19 hit. And so what they did was just further explode the issue with the migration to the mountains that we saw from a lot of urban areas. And really now we're facing this huge challenge which can no longer be ignored. And so we look at the impact, you know, when ski areas and other local businesses, whether that's tourism or non-tourism related, when they're unable to house their employees within the communities in which they're situated, it brings about a number of different significant challenges. And so, you know, first and foremost, it's obviously difficult to attract employees, let alone talented employees. And this is where labor shortage and affordable housing really go hand in hand. And, you know, if you talk to most mountain resort operators and communities right now within North America, you know, these are the two top issues that they're currently facing. Obviously, it affects their ability to operate at full capacity, thereby affecting their economic sustainability, which, you know, today is a real issue given that so many of these resort communities are still recovering from COVID-19 and some of the shutdowns that have impacted the previous season. For those employees that are, you know, able to live either within the community or largely in the surrounding communities, they're faced with these commutes to and from work. This obviously is unsafe in many instances. We're talking about high mountain passes. We're talking about, you know, transportation on large highways at high speeds. And so there are often a lot of accidents. From a carbon emissions standpoint, it's horrible as well. You know, environmentally, this is not sustainable to have a lot of single occupancy vehicles traveling back and forth on a day-to-day basis. From a social perspective, you know, it's really difficult for a lot of these employees to establish a sense of community because they're kind of torn between the community in which they reside and the community in which they work. And all of these issues come together. And what we see is high turnover, thereby also contributing to the labor shortage, but also limited quality of life for a lot of these employees, which is an issue too. It also places a lot of strain on surrounding bedroom communities as they're faced in dealing with providing a lot of the community services that many of these employees require. There's also a strain on regional transportation, which depending on the region may be relatively non-existent or relatively limited in funding. And then obviously there's the issue of sprawl development. You know, it encourages development outside of these mountain resort communities, more affordable unincorporated areas or sort of bedroom communities down valley, which also affects the character of the destination and its, you know, desirability from a tourism standpoint. And so what are some of the solutions that we're seeing? You know, employer-funded housing is probably one of the most common that we've seen over the years, in which, you know, housing is provided by the employer to ensure that a certain percentage of their employees are going to be able to live nearby. Largely, this has been something that's been taken on by larger ski areas. But, you know, we're starting to see this discussion happen more and more. And this image I have here is from Saddleback Mountain in Maine, which is more of a medium-sized ski area. And they've just rolled out a plan to fundraise to build this $4.5 million employee housing facility right at the base of one of their lower mountain lifts. And what's unique about this is, you know, this sort of crowdsourcing attempts to address this affordable housing issue, but also the fact that the ski area is willing to give up, you know, what you could argue is prime real estate for development for employee housing. And this just shows how significant the issue is. We're also seeing, you know, a lot of ski areas who don't have that access to large tracts of land to develop their own employee housing look towards other solutions. And so, you know, one example here is tiny homes. You know, this picture is taken from Aspen Skiing Company, who are building a fleet of tiny homes at a campground in nearby Basalt in Colorado as a way to supplement their existing affordable housing options, which aren't sufficient to house enough of its workforce. We're also seeing other ski areas turn to things like the Turns for Tenants program, which is a way that ski areas are trying to incentivize different, like homeowners, landlords, anyone who may have an available bed, let alone an available rental unit that they can put forth for employee housing in return for maybe a season pass or other on-mountain perks, just to ensure that there are no cold beds left within the community. Then we're also seeing a range of affordable, housing solutions that are community-led. And, you know, the first and foremost, what we're seeing is the establishment of things like housing authorities. And so these housing authorities largely helped to address the issue of affordable housing by looking towards the management, fundraising, funding, and development of these projects. And they're largely aided by local policy. And so, you know, we draw upon the example of Colorado, the state of Colorado, and this most recent elections in November. If you look at a lot of the ballot measures at many of the mountain resort communities, I would like to say, you know, a large majority of them had something on the ballot relevant to affordable housing. And that was in terms of things like short-term rentals, whether it was putting permit restrictions or, you know, rezoning certain districts so that they're able to collect tax from short-term rentals. There were a lot of initiatives related to increasing lodging and or sales and or property taxes to specifically fund affordable housing initiatives. And then there were a lot of efforts as well to increase density in some of these communities. You know, as mentioned in the previous slides, you know, one of the factors contributing to affordable housing are growth restrictions. And so some of these mountain communities have really tight growth boundaries to prevent sprawl, but they also have height restrictions to protect, you know, mountain view lines. And so the only way to increase housing inventory is to fill in if you can't go out or up. Some of the development initiatives that we're also seeing, many of these are sort of public-private partnerships, looking at things like an increase in deed-restricted housing, multifamily housing development as opposed to single-family housing development, requirements that developers contribute to affordable housing fund, or at least a certain percentage of new development is going to be affordable. And then what we're seeing is some really interesting conversations between public and public offices. So regional collaborations where mountain resort communities are talking to other nearby communities in the broader sort of region about ways they can pool resources to really sort of have these conversations about how we can, you know, create affordable housing options, maybe down valley, alongside regional transportation issues to benefit the community as like the broader region as a whole. And so just to sum up, you know, from what I've discussed here, you know, as you can see, there's no real silver bullet. There's no one solution from any one sector that's really going to solve affordable housing. You know, I would say there's no mountain resort community within North America that really has it, you know, 100%, you know, addressed. And rather, there's going to be this need for collaboration to really address it at a regional level, because we're kind of at that stage where mountain resort communities simply just don't have access sometimes to just the land even to address this issue. And so while the short-term costs are high, we've really hit this point where I don't really see any other solution. It's not something that can be ignored for any longer. And so these mountain resort communities and destinations are really seeking to become sustainable and livable, affordable housing, and hand in hand with that labor. These are some issues that are really going to have to be addressed here and now.
Thank you, Natalie. So very interesting, and of course very similar to some of the challenges faced in British Columbia, for example, and I'm sure in many other places. One question I had that you can either answer now or take up later if you think it's in any way relevant was on, if you think about affordable housing and we think about year-round mountain destinations, do you have workers who are living the old hashtag van life who are also working? Is that possible to?
There are, but the reality is, you know, it's pretty harsh lifestyle over the winter, but we are seeing, you know, Crested Butte, for example, in Colorado, Southern Colorado, they're having really significant issues with housing where it's not just folks who are doing the van life, but it's the car life, as well as camping. You know, camping on public lands year round, which, as you can imagine, is very difficult to do throughout the winter, simply because there is no housing. And I think it's important to sort of distinguish between, you know, hashtag van life, where that is largely a lifestyle choice, versus van life or car life or camping life where there's no other alternative. And I think that's a big challenge.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Natalie. And thanks once again to our 4 presenters. We are going to move on now. I'm going to ask Professor Rudy Hartman to make a few comments on the presentations as he has seen them together. But it's also a good time for those of you that are in the live audience to start formulating your own questions. Rudy's going to speak for about 4 or 5 minutes, raise some issues, and we're going to open it up then to questions from the floor and for the presenters to also talk a little bit with each other. We will end the recording just after Rudy's comments, so you know your questions won't be recorded, so you can be a bit more relaxed in your asking of them. Rudy, take it away, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you see me? All right. So what a great round of contributions. Very enjoyable presentations. But what it also clearly shows is that mountain tourism has its major problems now, whether it's in the Austrian Alps, whether it's in the Swedish Arctic, or in the Himalaya mountain region, or in Colorado. So I argue that we are now in an age of climate change with an enduring pandemic at a juncture, that mountain tourism faces many serious challenges. A few comments to Marius. Yes, he clearly shows how the Austrian Alps, the environment was affected by the climate change with the closure of a popular ski lift, okay? And I see similarities between the Alps, what is playing out there, and here in Colorado. So he mentions the revival of summer tourism. We have seen that here in Colorado as well. It's a viable option, and we have seen quite a few people participating in this form of sustainable mountain tourism, I think. Then he sees a projected decline of ski tourism, where he talks even about the death of ski tourism in the Alps. So I'm more optimistic regarding the Colorado Rockies. So the ski resort industry has found different responses. So we have seen a lot of investment into snowmaking equipment. All the Colorado ski areas have snowmaking, and it is a way to survive a snow-parched winter. So, and if we look at the leaders in this field, like Vail Resorts, they spent tons of money in snowmaking equipment, not only covering more parts of the mountain, but also in the efficiency. So we have seen tremendous progress in this technology, whether you like it or not. So it's, Cenk mentions the need for real snow for the Beijing Olympics, but it's a mix now, it's a mix now. Then another response I noticed here is for snow sports, people have more and more activities outside the commercial ski areas. So of course, in high elevation areas where snow is available. And there is a new form of skiing, it's called uphill skiing, uphill skiing. So it's a sort of a sportive formulation of old-fashioned ski tourism or ski touring, okay? And so Cenk mentions that even Sweden in the Arctic region is affected by climate change. So it was kind of a surprise for me. And so it's, he gives a lot of attention to the effects of climate change. So I'm glad about his focus on the Arctic region, so which have seen tremendous changes because of climate change. Then Sanjay, great that you focus on social, cultural issues in the Himalaya region. This should be part of a sustainable mountain tourism perspectives. We should support the livelihood of the local people. We should support the culture of local people. So I'm glad you bring it up and you sketch or examine a hierarchy within the service of these international trackers. And I also like your new moral emphasis. So I look forward to reading your book or your article. I think geographers can do a lot in the discussion of sustainable mountain tourism, and we can have a more morally based perspective on things. So I'm glad you bring it up and you strengthen these efforts. So great, Sanjay, I enjoyed that. Natalie also points to social issue. I think I have to keep it short. Sorry, Natalie. And it's an old-time problem. The need for affordable housing has been around for many, many years, maybe decades. But what we have seen in the last ski season and this season already, a dramatic expression of this problem. It's and I have an article about what happened in Aspen. You mentioned Aspen several times. So the tremendous gap between the super rich and the people who have to live there, work there, and what they did. And I quote this here. In Aspen, the Aspen City Council here this week stopped issuing not just short-term rental permits like R&B, but permits for all home construction, all, as the city struggles with the critical lack of affordable housing and the increasing use of homes by vacationers. A moratorium which was passed this past Wednesday, goes beyond suspending new short-term rentals. It includes a pause in all residential construction or renovation that expands the size of a home. This is the dramatic response the folks in Aspen had. So I wanted to thank Natalie to pointing to this issue again. What are the options? And I think it's we need to make decisions. A few words about my long-term observations here in Colorado High Country. What we have seen is that more and more an elite has the rights to enjoy the high country of Colorado. So this is the situation. Skiing or spending mountain tourism has become so expensive. So and so I congratulate Cenk that he raises the question, sustain what? And I would like to add, sustainable environment for whom? For whom? For a small elite who can afford to buy scenic properties, or for everybody who should be entitled to participate. So these are a few crucial questions I have. And climate change is real. And so we have to take up these questions that were raised by Marius, by Cenk, by Sanjay, and Natalie. Great presentations. Thank you very much. So
thank you, Rudy.
yeah, I tried
for those.
I have no questions.
Yeah, thank you, Rudy. Yeah, thanks for the comments, and I think they were a little bit provocative and a little bit good summary also of some of the key issues that we face in many of the regions. And of course, the regions are diverse and face different issues, but we're seeing some of those common themes in there too. I hope also that gave others a chance to think of some questions at this stage, because we're coming up against the top of the hour. I'm going to thank all of the presenters and Rudy for his comments at the end once more, and we'll bring an official end to the session by stopping the recording, and then we can go to a more informal Q&A if anybody else wants to jump in, and we have some questions already in the chat. So.